Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching Gulf Today on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. Sharjah's National Oil Corporation has announced the successful drilling and testing of the Hadaiba-2 well, its second gas discovery in the Hadaiba field, reaching a depth of 13,200 feet and marking Sharjah's fifth onshore gas field, and reflects SNOC's commitment to sustainable growth and reliable energy supply for the emirate. Israel's military has confirmed that the return of Staff Sergeant Itay Chen remains from Gaza, marking progress in the U.S.-brokered ceasefire. The 19-year-old Israeli-American was abducted by Hamas on October 7, 2023, and declared dead in March this year. French President Emmanuel Macron has announced that Iran has freed 2 French nationals after more than 3 years in detention. The pair, detained since 2022 on espionage-related charges France called unfounded, were released on bail and are now safe at the French embassy in Tehran, Iran. An Abu Dhabi labor court has ordered a company to pay a former employee 197,600 dirhams in unpaid wages, gratuity and leave allowance after failing to pay him for 22 months during his employment in 2002-2010. Taiwan's Foreign Minister Lin Chia-lung has accused China of adding conditions to Taiwan's participation in the upcoming 2026 APEC summit in Shenzhen, breaking its written promise of equal participation made at 2024's Peru APEC, as Beijing insists Taiwan's involvement must follow the One China principle amid soaring tensions. Zohran Mamdani has made history as New York City's first Muslim South Asian and Africa-born mayor after defeating Andrew Cuomo and Curtis Sliwa in a progressive landslide. The Democratic Socialists' victory marks a major win for the party's left wing, making him the city's youngest mayor in over a century when he takes office on January 1st. U.S. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth has confirmed that the U.S. military killed 2 suspected drug smugglers in the Eastern Pacific. This marks the 16th strike since September, raising the overall death toll to at least 67 in Caribbean and Pacific operations. The death toll from Typhoon Kalmaegi rises to at least 66 in the Philippines, with the Cebu province worst hit. Floods and 80 miles per hour winds sweep through cities in the country. Meanwhile, a rescue helicopter goes down, claiming the lives of all 6 crew members. Now we start with Israel. Israel's military confirmed the return of the remains of Staff Sergeant Itay Chen from Gaza, marking another step forward in the first phase of the U.S.-brokered ceasefire deal. The 19-year-old soldier is identified as an Israeli-American soldier who was abducted by Hamas on October 7, 2023, and was officially declared dead in March this year. The IDF has expressed deep condolences to his family and reaffirmed its commitment to bringing all deceased hostages home. On 4th October, remains of another hostage were returned as Hamas continues to hand over bodies under the ceasefire that began on October 10th. Now we welcome Sasha Majda. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Jerusalem. Thank you very much, Sasha, for joining us again. Good to see you. Sasha, now looking at this, what's the situation of hostage release, or how many hostages have come back to Israel so far?
So far, since the beginning of the Trump peace deal, we've seen 20 living hostages that were finally reunited with their families, 20 living hostages that are now able to start the rehabilitation process, reunite with their families, and hopefully have a better future here in Israel and another chance, because they spent 2 years under the worst conditions, under inhumane treatment in the tunnels of Gaza. And finally, we're full of joy that those 20 living hostages are home. Since the beginning of the ceasefire, Hamas had 72 hours as well to release the 28 deceased hostages as agreed on the deal, but Hamas has been in constant violation of this clause of the deal since they failed to release these 28 hostages. Hamas claimed to not know where all the bodies of the hostages are, so they slowly started drip-drabbing hostages. A few hostages' bodies every day were being released until today. We now have 7 bodies of hostages that are still held in Gaza, still brutally held in Gaza. And Hamas continues to play with the pain and suffering of the families that deserve a funeral, that deserve a proper and dignified funeral for their loved ones. So as of now, there's 7 left. Hamas claims to not know where most of them are, but Israel intelligence knows that at least 4 more are within Hamas's reach. And there's a few reasons why Hamas could be trying to pretend where they don't know where the hostages is. One is, of course, to buy time in the negotiations and to avoid phase 2 of the deal, which is basically they're agreeing to disarm and leave the Gaza Strip. So Hamas would do anything to stay in power and to extend their days in the Gaza Strip, including playing with the families of hostages that just want to see their loved ones back and with a proper burial and the closure that they deserve. Another reason why they're holding on to the bodies could be to allow for equipment to enter the Gaza Strip that's used for returning or for searching for bodies. For example, these huge trucks that could enter and try and find bodies could also be used for their tunnel building capabilities. So Hamas knows where the bodies are. Hamas is using these bodies as bargaining chips, but each time the mediators, the Israel and the United States puts the pressure on Hamas, they somehow find the bodies. So that's what must continue, pressure on Hamas until all of the bodies of the deceased hostages are returned and we can enter phase 2 of the deal.
Do you think that Israel and Gaza Strip is ready for phase 2, or do you think there's still a lot of challenges that lie and a lot of unsolved, resolved issues lie between phase 1 and phase 2?
The main issue that lies between phase 1 and phase 2 is the release of the deceased hostages. They were all supposed to come home. The families need the closure, and Israel cannot allow a situation where even one body of a deceased hostage is remaining in Gaza. These families, their pain needs to end. They need the closure. And if Israel is not able to return all these 7 hostages, then it will create a situation where terrorist organizations around the world will know that they can take hostages, keep them in perpetuity, and not face any consequences. So these hostages must return, and then we can move on to phase 2 of the deal. One obstacle, of course, is also the de-radicalization of the Gaza Strip. I mean, the Gaza Strip must be reconstructed. The Gaza Strip has faced severe destruction. Hamas has inflicted a horrible tragedy on the people of Gaza and on the Gaza Strip. But unless we see a full de-radicalization of Gaza, then this reconstruction will only allow some sort of force as Hamas and this ideology that seeks to destroy the state of Israel to try and plan another October 7th. So I think that Trump's proposal to the UN for a UN-backed force could be a significant step forward in phase 2 of the deal. It would allow for a US-backed force to take security control of the Gaza Strip, which would be very, very significant for Israel because it would give us the security guarantees that we require without having to go to war ourselves. Israel doesn't want to enter war again. Israel doesn't want to go back to a period of war. Israel wants to move on and wants a better future for both the Israeli people and the people of Gaza, but that requires security, de-radicalization, and of course Hamas's disarmament. So once we can release the bodies of the hostages, then phase 2, the implementation becomes much easier. As Trump said, this ceasefire is not fragile. And I think that's the key word. Trump saying this is not meaning that Hamas wants to disarm voluntarily. It means that there are a lot of cards on the table that one way or another, Hamas will disarm. That Trump and the US administration will pressure Hamas to leave Gaza, to disarm, and to allow the people of the Gaza Strip to have a better future under a regime that doesn't seek the destruction of Israel, rather live side by side with it.
With that, I would like to thank Sasha Machta for sharing that. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we stay in the region. White House Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt has stated that U.S. President Donald Trump plans to meet with Syrian President Ahmad al-Sharaa at the White House on 10th November, marking the first ever visit by Syrian head of state to the U.S. Capitol. Since seizing power from Bashar al-Assad last December, Ahmad al-Sharaa has made a series of foreign trips as his transitional government seeks to re-establish Syria's ties with the world powers that had shunned Damascus during Assad's rule. Trump has sought good relations with Ahmad al-Sharaa, and in June, he has revoked most U.S. sanctions against Syria. He has also met with the Syrian leader last May during his visit to Saudi Arabia. Leavitt has said that Trump's decision to lift sanctions was historic, giving Syria a real chance at peace, and she noted that the administration has seen good progress under al-Sharaa's new leadership. This is what White House Press Secretary has said.
I can confirm that that meeting will be taking place here at the White House on Monday, and this is part of the president's efforts in diplomacy to meet with anyone around the world in the pursuit of peace. And as you know, when the president was in the Middle East, he made the historic decision to lift sanctions on Syria to give them a real chance at peace. And I think the administration, we've seen good progress on that front under their new leadership. And so he will be here at the White House on Monday, and I'll let the president speak further on it on Monday.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Sasha Machta. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Jerusalem. Thank you very much, Sasha, for staying with us. Can you tell us so far what has been lifted off of Syria and what has not?
Yeah, so Syria, as we know, since al-Sharaa took power, he's been trying to make a shift as more moderate leader. He has a jihadic past. He's been wanted terrorist around the world, but he seems to have taken a radical change and become more Western and open to Western influence in Syria. That's a significant step for the region as a whole, diminishing the power of Iran, diminishing the power of Hezbollah, and it's still not done. The situation in Syria is very fragile. The situation in Syria is not stable, and more than anything, the Syrians need stability. And I think that's what the United States understands, which is why they're slowly lifting sanctions on Syria while keeping an eye open to see whether this change that al-Juliani seems to have overtaken is a true change. As I've said many times, I think that this change, and whether it's a true change or not, depends on how Syria and al-Juliani is treating their minorities. We saw that the Druze community was massacred in the beginning of his regime, and innocent Druze were taken hostage. We also saw that some of the Alawites were also undergoing horrifying treatment by Syrian forces. There's many reasons why this could be happening. As I said, Syria is very unstable right now. The regime is not stable. And al-Juliani unified all sorts of military forces, including former jihadist forces. So sometimes he might not have full control of his army. And the U.S. understands that this situation in Syria is at a crossroads. Are we going to see a Syria that's going to head more towards a Western alignment, or are we going to see a Syria that's going to fall in the hands, again, of Russia and Iran? So I think that the U.S. understands clearly, and they want the first option.
Do you think this upcoming meeting of welcoming al-Sharaa to White House signals a lasting shift in U.S. policy towards Syria, or it's just temporary?
I think that the U.S. hopes for this to be long-term. I think that the U.S. is not taking any risks, but they are tracking Syria. They are always keeping an eye on what's going on in Syria because, as we said, is this change true or is it not? If al-Juliani truly is the Western-aligned, progressive, moderate leader he seems to be, or he's rebranding himself as, then the U.S. has an interest in keeping this long-term. The U.S. has an interest in diminishing Iranian influence. And one significant thing that happened with al-Juliani is that his taking over of Syria totally stopped Hezbollah smuggling weapons from Syria. It totally diminished Iran's influence. It totally diminished Iran's ring of fire around Israel. But this is more than Israel. This is a whole geopolitical situation where the U.S. might have a chance to have another foot in the region and combat Eastern forces that are such a threat to the U.S. and to the Western world.
Right. And How might this lifting of U.S. sanctions affect Syria's political transition and regional stability for Syria?
So the lifting of sanctions could grant stability. The lifting of sanctions could grant stability, and that's what Syrians need the most. It could also allow for foreign direct investment to enter Syria. It could allow for Syria to have more of their expats, of their refugees come back, which would significantly help the Syrian population and the Syrian society. So what Syria needs right now is for the U.S. to track their progress, to track their change, and lift the sanctions based on that.
Thank you very much, Sasha, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you. And now we stay on this topic. The United States has proposed a draft UNSC resolution to lift sanctions on Syrian President Ahmad al-Sharaa and Interior Minister Anas Khattab. The move comes ahead of Ahmad al-Sharaa's meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House on 10th November. It is not yet clear when the resolution could be put to a vote. A Security Council resolution requires at least 9 votes in favor and no vetoes from Russia, China, the US, France, or Britain to pass. Washington has been pushing the 15-member council for months to ease Syria's sanctions. After 13 years of civil war, Syria's former president Bashar al-Assad was ousted in December by insurgent forces that led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, formerly the Nusra Front and al-Qaeda's official Syria wing until 2016. Some members of HTS, including al-Sharaa and Khattab, remain under UN sanctions, but travel exemptions have been granted, making the White House visit likely. U.S. President Trump has announced in May that he would lift U.S. sanctions on Syria, and UN monitors have reported no active ties this year between al-Qaeda and HTS. Now we welcome back Sasha Majda. He's a political commentator, joins us live from Jerusalem. Thank you very much, Sasha, for staying with us. Sasha, should the U.S. prioritize engagement with transitional governments like al-Sharaa's over accountability for past human rights abuses or past connection of him to terrorist groups?
I think that the U.S. has, throughout their history, tied their foreign policy to human rights and to fellow democracies, but recently I see a shift away from that. The U.S. understands that if they're not going to build relations and engage with these countries, then Russia and China will. It's much bigger than just the U.S. and these two countries. It's not a bilateral scene, it's a multilateral scene. And that's why we see that the U.S. has been actively engaging in the Middle East. I mean, most of the countries here that the U.S. is building alliances with and has strong alliances with don't have a history of a clean history of human rights abuse. I mean, Saudi Arabia, we just need to use as a perfect example, but also Qatar and Turkey. So the U.S. allying itself and positioning itself with these countries that have a history of human rights abuse is part of a piece of a much larger game that has to do with the influence of Russia, Iran, and China. And it's unfortunate that this is the situation, but this is geopolitics, and the U.S. understands this, especially Donald Trump. If the U.S. won't enter Syria and won't build these relationships, then forces like the Iranian regime will. So that's a significant change in the U.S.'s foreign policy for the sake of the West.
And lastly, what do you think, Sasha, what implications or motivations are for U.S. on renewed U.S.-Syria relations for America's broader strategy in the Middle East?
The U.S. always wants to have another foot in the Middle East. The U.S. wants to access the resources of the Middle East. The U.S. wants to help in the development of the Middle East. The U.S. essentially wants quiet in the Middle East. And if the U.S. can bring a normalization between Syria and Israel, a historic normalization, then that would be a significant achievement for the Trump administration. I think that there's a few obstacles that remain, and we still have to see whether al-Juliani's regime is able to maintain a stable Syria and unify his fighters. But Israel won't make security concessions. But what we will do is reach out to the Syrian regime in the hopes of peace, which would be an amazing and extraordinary day for the Middle East and for the United States as a whole. And of course, decomposing Iran's horrible ring of fire that they built around the state of Israel, in Lebanon, Syria, Gaza, in Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. And slowly, since October 7th, Israel has been dismantling this ring of fire. And this is also in the interest of the United States. And if Syria were to fall, and if Syria were to join a normalization agreement with Israel, that would be historic for the United States as well.
With that, I would like to thank Sasha Machta for joining us as a political commentator and staying with us, so sharing throughout our news. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Iran. International Atomic Energy Agency Chief Rafael Grossi has stated that Iran must seriously improve cooperation with UN inspectors to avoid heightening tensions with the West. Grossi has told the media that while the IAEA has carried out about a dozen inspections in Iran since its hostilities with Israel in June, it had not been given access to nuclear facilities such as Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, which were bombed by the United States. Earlier, Grossi had said that movement had been detected near Iran's enriched uranium stockpile, but added that it did not imply that there was activity on enrichment. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Ismail Baghei has subsequently said that Grossi was aware of the peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program. Iranian officials have blamed the IAEA for providing a justification for Israel's bombing, which began the day after the IAEA board voted to declare Iran in violation of obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Now for this discussion, we welcome Suresh Goyal. He's a former Indian ambassador, joins us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for joining us again. Good to see you. Ambassador, how might a limited IAEA access to Iran's nuclear sites affect a global confidence in the country's commitment to non-proliferation?
Well, as far as a global commitment or the global understanding of inspections in Iran is concerned, it has been quite iffy even in the past, even before Israeli attacks, even though inspectors from the IAEA had more or less complete access to the Iranian facilities. It so happened that several statements, several regions led to Israeli attacks on the Iranian facilities, which has led to a breakdown in the inspections. Sanctions have badly impacted on Iran, there's no doubt. At the same time, it is doubtful that Iran is going to completely submit or yield to Western pressure on this issue. The nuclear program is important to them, the regional security as far as they can see. And therefore, my own sense is that while they will agree to say inspections in a phased manner, and they would probably in some time allow access to the inspectors to the facilities where they have not been able to reach as yet. But it is not going to happen as a kind of a response to the pressure from IAEA or West. Yes.
Reports are used to justify military actions by member states.
Sorry, I didn't hear that question. Can you repeat?
Yes, yes. I asked if should the IAEA be held accountable if its reports were used to justify military actions by member states, such as what happened this year on June, I think. Yeah.
Well, if the idea is to plunge the region into a kind of an unstable and a chaotic area, then a member state might take action. But for the time being, considering that both IAEA earlier had certified that the enrichment program of Iran had not led to development of weapons, even though it was close, but it had not taken the plunge as yet. Therefore, I do hope that there is no action by the member states precipitate action, which could actually then cause more chaos in the area. What is needed is increased pressure from IAEA to open up Iranian facilities for inspections. Also, to establish a kind of a security environment in the area where Iran does not feel threatened as it did earlier in the month of June. It's a very complex issue, so it has to be it has to be dealt with. A certain kind of a sensitivity from the West and also understanding from Iran. Very difficult, but necessary. Yes.
And how do you think how the recent U.S. bombings of Iranian nuclear facilities are impacting the prospects for renewed diplomatic engagement with Tehran?
If you recall that was a development that actually led to the breakdown in the whole process. But again, USA, once they had done the bombing, they stayed away. What I'm hoping is that they will not undertake any further bombings of Iran for whatever reason, because the idea is not to bomb it, but to basically make sure that this enrichment does not lead to development of nuclear weapons, and the bombings will not be a solution.
With that, I would like to thank Ambassador for joining us. Thank you, and sharing that insight throughout this topic. Now we move on to our next news. The French President Emmanuel Macron has stated that Iran has released 2 French nationals who were detained there for more than 3 years. Macron has added that Cécile Colli and her partner Jacques Paris have been released from Even prison. The French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot has confirmed that they are safe at the embassy in Tehran ahead of their final release. The pair, who were arrested in May 2022 during a tourist trip, are believed to be the last French nationals held in Iran. Last month, they were found guilty of spying on behalf of both France and Israel and were handed lengthy prison sentences. France has accused Iran of state hostage-taking and of keeping its nationals in conditions akin to torture, something Tehran has denied. However, Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Ismail Baghei has stated that these 2 French nationals jailed for a long time over national security infractions have been released on bail by the judge in charge of the case and will be placed under surveillance until the next stage of the judicial proceedings. And that's a wrap on Gulf Today. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.